Hello everyone. This lecture is part of your paper on news and society. Colonialism was a parasitic system which thrived by destroying the indigenous culture and knowledge system of the colony. It had two prompt aims: siphoning of the colony's revenue surplus and converting the colony in growth and content. A replica of the metropolis, it tried to establish cultural and ideology hegemony to rule over the body and mind of the colonial people in order to maintain and continue their control. The challenge to this notion of intellectual cloning came from the Indian national movement, led by Indian National Congress, and prior to them by the social reformers of the 19th century. The social reformers of the 19th century critically analyzed and indulged in the introspection of the Indian tradition, customs and practices. The attempt of the 19th century social reforms and the leaders of Indian National Congress gave rise to debate and cognitive introspection, leading to the questioning of whether the Western paradigm and British model of knowledge system, communication and governance was comprehensive enough to be able to take India forward. However, the level of India forward march unfolding conveyed that Eurocentric paradigm could not capture the worldview, truly representing the Indian historical and social realities. Nor was it capable enough to address its problem, as they were fundamentally linked with colonialism. We hold India then by being in reality, as in reputation, a superior race to the Asiatic, and if this natural superiority did not exist, we should not and could not retain the country for 1 week. If then we really are a morally superior race governed by higher motive and possessing higher attributes than the Asiatics, the more we improve the capacity for so understanding, the firmer will become our power. Away then with the assumption of equality, let us accept our true position, a dominant race. So placed, let us establish our rule by setting them a high example, by making them feel the value of truth, honesty, and by raising their moral and intellectual powers. The challenge to colonialism, though in an organized manner within All India Organization leadership and social base, began once Indian National Congress came into existence. Through her writing, historian Visalakshi Menon very cogently brings out to light how from the inception colonial rule was being challenged and questioned by the people of India, employing traditional methods of communication in organizing opposition in the form of revolts, rebellions and movements. According to Yogendra Singh and Visalakshi Menon, predominantly in India from ancient to colonial times, orality was the major tradition of communication. It was both oral and visual, and best example of it can be seen during Sannyasi Rebellion, Rangpur Rebellion, Santhal Rebellion, and 1857 First War of Independence, beating of the drum, blowing horn or flute circulation of breach of sar tree, lotus, chapatis of wheat and barley, and so on. These methods of communication employed by the rebels proved to be very effective because they were culturally alien and not easily understood by the colonial masters. The rebels could decode the message directly, thus enabling them to mobilize on a much larger scale. With the expansion of educated middle class amongst the Indian community and the realization of their subjugation in spirit and physically by the colonialist, opened a new plethora of communication method, press, pamphlets and petitions. The realization of the organized political activity to educate the masses about their exploitation by the colonial state and to communicate to the masters of the suffering of the Indian peasantry and the poor. These new channels of media were employed by the Indian political class. The newly emerging politically aware, educated Indian middle class now adopted the same channel of communication which the imperialists were using for justifying their rule. Now slowly and steadily, the growing political class started using print media newspapers for popularizing nationalism and anti-colonialism, exposing the basic contradictions between the colonialists and the Indians by using both English and vernacular as the medium. The protagonist of using the colonial method of communication for enlightening the Indian masses in the beginning were the social reformers who established the president. Most notable amongst them were Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who established Samvad Kaumudi, Morn of Intelligence, in 1821 in Calcutta. Indu Prakash started in 1861. Bombay, in which regular articles of M.G. Ranade on social issues, including widow remarriage, appeared. A women's journal, Istri Bodh, was launched in 1857. Karsondal Mulji, a great social reformer, wrote in it. Tilak, along with Agarkar and with the support of M.G. Ranade, started Kesari in Marathi and Maharatha in English. Dadabhai Naoroji too became the editor of Rast Goftar. His own monthly journal, The Voice of India, came out in February 1882. It aimed at voicing Indian viewpoint and bring justice to Indians. Similarly, in 1878, Subramaniam Iyer brought out Hindu. There was an unprecedented mushrooming of journals and newspapers in the 19th century. Journalism was regarded as the most efficient and effective mode of dissemination of reform ideas and initiative during that period. A good number of intellectuals started publications of periodicals and nearly all were associated with some press. At the beginning of 1880, there were approximately 77 Indian-owned newspapers in Bombay. Presidency, with a total circulation of 30,600, thus giving an effective readership of about 3 lakhs. By the end of 1885, the number of Indian-owned papers in the Bombay Presidency rose to 133 with a total circulation of 62,729 and an effective readership of over 6 lakhs. Jambekar founded the Bombay Darpan, the first Anglo-Marathi weekly in Western India, in 1832. He also started the Digdarshan, the first monthly Marathi magazine, in 1840. Prabhakar, a Marathi weekly edited by Bhau Mahajan, was started in 1844 and was in circulation till 1855. Gopal Hari Deshmukh, known by his pen name Lokhet Wadi, started the Danyan Prakash in Pune in 1849 and founded the Hindu Prakash and Anglo-Marathi Weekly in 1862 in Bombay. The Native Opinion and English Weekly was started by Mandlik in 1864 and Prarthana Samaj started the Subodh Patrika in 1873. Chiplunkar started the Nibandh Mala, a monthly Marathi magazine, in 1874. And Mahatma Phule started the Deen Bandhu, the mouthpiece of Satya Shodhak Samaj, in 1875. Educating people and creating public awareness about the problems confronting the country was the underlying idea behind the social reformers. Journalistic ventures. Towards the end of the 19th century, a more assertive and explicitly nationalist in fervor newspapers made their appearance. Surendranath Banerjee founded Bengali and Bipin Chandra Pal established New India and Vande Mataram. The upsurge in nationalist writings through the journals and newspapers increased with the enforcement of the Vernacular Press Act of 1878. In large numbers, students protested. Patriotic songs and plays were sung and enacted. In Lahore, under the influence of Surendranath Banerjee, Dayal Singh Majithia started Tribune. In Calcutta, as in Bombay Presidency, the Indian-owned press were very influential. A large number of Indian-owned English newspapers and journals came into existence in Calcutta. The most prominent ones being the Bengali Amrit Bazar Patrika, Hindu Patriot Indian Mirror, and the Bengal Public Opinion. Bipin Chandra Pal started a Bengali weekly called Paridarsak in 1880 at Sylhet. Pandit Motilal Nehru too started a newspaper named Independent, whose editor till 1921 was Bipin Chandra Pal. Other vocal and important newspapers and weeklies were Punjabi in Lahore, Swarajya in Bombay, Yugantar and Sonar Bangla in Calcutta. Leader in English and Abhay Uday in Hindi were started by Madan Mohan Malviya in Allahabad in 1909. The press became a very powerful medium by 1900 for dissemination of nationalist ideas throughout the country. According to historian Bipin Chandra, the influence of the press extended far beyond its literate subscribers. Nor was it confined to cities and large towns. A newspaper would reach remote villages and would then be read by a reader to tens of others. Gradually, library movements sprung up all over the country. A local library would be organized around a single newspaper. A table, a bench, or two or a charpoy would constitute the capital equipment. Every piece of news or editorial comment would be read or heard or thoroughly discussed. The newspaper became the political educator. Reading it or discussing it became a form of political participation. During the early phase of the Indian national movement, freedom of press was one of the core demands of the nationalists. In 1879, a public meeting was held in Calcutta to protest against the Vernacular Press Act. Before Tilak and Annie Besant launched their Home Rule movement for dominant status, the Indian press had put before the colonial government the demand for self-rule. In 1870-74, Amrit Bazar Patrika demanded the Constitution of Parliament of India. These demands were more vociferously put forward in Kesari and Maharat by Tilak subsequently. He was the first Indian to understand the power and effective use of press for the nationalist cause. As the gulf between the colonialist and the native increased, political leadership passed from Calcutta to Maharashtra, where Tilak held the reins of leadership and was in full command of the nationalist press, which was dominated by his Kesari and Maharat. Interestingly, the Anglo-Indian press showed no sympathy to the Congress and its press from late 19th century onwards. Openly suspicious and distrustful, they launched, on the other hand, attack on the Congress. For example, the pioneer denounced the Congress as seditious organization and called its movement as similar to the Irish freedom movement. The Viceroy Minto too began to take action against the Indian press in 1906. Under his governance in June 1906, Punjabi, a Lahore-based newspaper, was prosecuted and its editor was jailed for 6 months. The editors of Hindustan Yugantar and Sonar Bangla were arrested and prosecuted on the charges of sedition. With the proliferation of nationalist and vernacular press, tirades against them were initiated. Since government could not ignore them, the government wanted to send a strong message to the Indians. So from 1907 onwards, government on regular basis indulged in the arrest, prosecution and confiscation of the nationalist and the vernacular press. Lokmanya Tilak was prosecuted on the charge of sedition in 1908. His Kesari and Maharat created havoc for the government. In the editorials of both the newspapers, he compared the nationalist press with night watchmen and outlined their responsibility as to keep check on the executives and put fear in them of public opinion. By the end of 1882, Kesari became the largest vernacular paper in circulation and Maharat attained the status of the leading representative of Indian public opinion. Tilak, through these newspapers, conveyed his views on the government by writing on the inadequate relief measures during the Great Famine and Plague in Bombay Presidency in 1896-97. Tilak till 1919, before he died in 1920, was the most dedicated and persistent critic of the government. He criticized the government action during the plague epidemic in Pune, repressive policy of the government to stop public meetings, gagging press, and encouraging false reporting of the Anglo-Indian press about the nationalist press. This led to his prosecution and he was sentenced to 6 years of rigorous imprisonment on 22nd of July 1908. The anxiety of the government increased with the expansion of the nationalist press. This was evident from the wild scare spread by the Anglo-Indian press reporting on the eve of the 50th anniversary of the 1857 mutiny that the nationalists under the leadership of Lala Lajpat Rai were planning a revolt in Punjab. They published that Lala Lajpat Rai had collected 1 lakh men to attack Lahore Fort on 10th May 1907. Government and Anglo-Indian press attacked Tilak and Annie Besant. Home Rule movement launched separately in 1916. Annie Besant too opposed the government's attempt of curtailing freedom of expression and press vigorously. Action was taken against her paper New India on a number of occasions under the press law of 1910, and the securities she deposited were forfeited and fresh ones were demanded. However, Annie Besant continued her campaign against the government, taking precaution of not infringing the law, thus causing a good deal of embarrassment to the government. A white lady siding with the nationalists and the natives. With the emergence of Gandhi on the national scene, a new narrative entered into the domain of the new nationalist press. The death of Gopal Krishna Gokhale and Firoz Shah Mehta in 1915 and Tilak in 1920. The role of the earlier leaders was marginalized now. Gandhi introduced a more radical definition of moderation and his political strategies of satyagraha. Non-cooperation, non-violence, civil disobedience fundamentally altered the context of political debate and action. He reorganized and revitalized Congress by expanding its social base, centralizing control over the organization and portraying it as an alternative to the colonial state and the governance. Now the nationalist press spoke with new vigor, land and confidence. Till now its impact was circumscribed by lack of mass base and participation. Only Tilak was able to extend his area of influence by his bold writings. However, with the arrival of Gandhi, a new enthusiasm was injected into the nascent, struggling nationalist press. With him rose a number of vernacular journals in all provinces. The change in thought and deed brought to nationalist press by Gandhi posed a serious challenge to the British rule, for their tone and action were different from those they had been accustomed to, that is, the earlier vernacular press and the Indian English press. As an editor, Gandhi took over Young India in 1990 and laid down strict standards for himself by not accepting advertisements. He believed that for the survival of the journal or newspaper, cooperation and revenue from subscribers was essential. He regarded freedom of expression as an essential bloodline for democracy and strongly rejected any kind of restrictions and censors by the government. But he was also an ardent believer in democracy, with accountability and responsibility. So he strongly rejected any kind of sensationalism, flippancy on casual reporting by a newspaper. His writings had the widest circulation of any single individual in the country. Gandhi believed in the significance of press media for the survival of democracy. According to him, press played a basic role in the dissemination of ideas to the farthest corner of human civilization, and if it could not be achieved through press, then endeavor should be made through handwritten pamphlets. His writings generated large-scale impact, all the more by his spectrum of issues and themes, from unjust policies of the government to cleanliness and personal hygiene to be practiced by the natives for attaining Swaraj. The vicissitude of political environment defined the progress of Young India. While in prison after the civil disobedience movement in 1932, He brought about Harjan, the major ideological vehicle on social and political issues of the Indian National Congress. Indian national movement entering into its most challenging phase with the arrival of Gandhi forces the government to review its existing attitude towards the national leaders and the press. The revisionist change was slow, but pragmatic considerations did not let the government to abandon it. With increasing attack, more potent and effective from the new leaderships of the Congress did not allow the government to be complacent and be satisfied with the artful imagery practiced earlier. There was increasing emphasis on image and concern about its ability to hold on to its image of civilizational and modernization mission vis-a-vis India. The challenge posed by the Congress and the nationalist press now questioned British institutional inheritance and its imposition through their reporting with a new vision of free India. In response, the government made assumptions about Congress, weaknesses and its collapse. The rising status of the Congress from an outlaw organization to playing central role in the new politics created problems for the colonialists as to how to deal with this new shift. Many officials could not decide which image represented the reality and which image they preferred. The government oscillated between offering olive branch of reforms as well as option of repression as seen during non-cooperation, civil disobedience and Quit India movement. According to Israel, by initiating constitutional reforms and projecting the withdrawal of Gandhian movement as a sign of victory, the focus of the government in portrayal of its image as a progressive and enlightened participant in the design of India future and that of the Congress as a spent force unrepresentative of the people of India who would find a more secure place under the Raj umbrella. The colonial officialdom were not happy with the provisions given to the natives under pressure from the Congress in the form of constitutional reforms. They backed restoration of previous system of administrative curtailment of freedom to the press. They were not happy with the restoration of Metcalfe liberal standards and repealment of 1910 Press Act in 1922. But when civil disobedience movement was launched in 1930, clamoring for rigid press control gained momentum, and in 1931 a new Press Act came into action. However, by then much water had flown under the bridge. Now it was possible to reimpose the Adam regulations, and the new act was formed more to deal with those who advocated and stimulated violence and not criticism of the government. In conclusion, the history of the nationalist press has not yet got its due recognition. Most of the work on the nationalist press are either colored with imperialist semiotics or are purely narrative in nature. Therefore, the Western historians and their Indian followers with fluidity fall into the imperialist viewpoint of looking at the character of the nationalist press as something which was struggling with symbolic representation to convince their readers and their adversaries that what they were reporting was factual reporting of the ground reality, that is, increasing mass appeal of nationalism and the Congress. The Indian historian and journalist were charmed by the format and style of reporting and the get-up of the newspapers rather than the manner and nature of reporting. Thus, such historians concerned with the history of press fell into the trap of imperialist historians who, under the garb of Victorian liberalism, still concentrate on the denouncing the contribution of nationalist press and present it as a ramshackle coalition, symbolic representation, blocked down with asserting a defensive Hindu identity involved in local interest. Therefore, there is an essential need to review, revisit and reevaluation of the role of the nationalist press within the context of colonialism with objectivity and sincerely. Such analysis of nationalist press and the Congress by the liberal Western historians leaves an invidious flavor. There are two examples of it. In order to achieve their goal, Congress leaders had to send out messages that deepened on the reiteration of symbolic language, equating the Congress with unity and freedom, and at the same time tearing its enemies with the reverse. It was a package deal, and the removal of one component meant the loss of the other. The stereotypes of the British campaign had to be attacked and replaced with a group of their own. Reporting done by the nationalist press on the Punjab wrong and mass appeal of Congress led movements, according to Western historians, were attempts allowing vivid image to overshadow pale reality. Further reflections of their empathy with imperialist perspective can be gleaned from such assessment. A totalitarian regime might have prevented nationalist leaders from achieving such notoriety and suppressed as well news reports of embarrassing events. But the British government of India lacked that absolute power. It could and did control at the margin, but in the main, the communication system was extraordinarily free to use propaganda on behalf of any mission as long as the attacks were not associated with violence. There were periods of great official sensitivity, but absolute control was not even a subject of dreams among the diehards in the Home Department. The press provided prominence and exaggeration over time. Despite division and defeats, the Congress was able to build its case against the government self-image and its portrayal of the nationalist opposition. For more details, please read the module on this lecture carefully and attempt the questions in the end. Thank you.